G'day guys and gal. The Tau Empire often memed on for being the weakest faction in the setting. However, they also appear to be the only faction that is yet to peak and is growing stronger every day, whilst all other factions are in a state of stagnation or even decay. If the Tau's trajectory continues as is, mathematically they will end up being the dominant force in the galaxy at one point or another. It's not just that they are constantly upgrading their technology and recruiting new alien races to their cause, shoring up their weaknesses by doing so, but it's also due to the fact that they are actively expanding, with each conquest being called a sphere expansion, of which there have been 5 and a 6th is on the way. But what was actually achieved during each expansion? How did the Tau grow from each conquest, and did all of them actually end up going well? Before we get started, we have a truly epic launch for you today, that being the launch of the Tau Healey Strikeforce, the largest major mini release we have done in quite some time, featuring 11 new models. This includes the Carvon Minor Warriors, a squad of 5 dynamically posed warriors with interchangeable parts so you can make a force of 10 or more and have them all unique. Then there is the Voskar Stealth Warriors, a squad of 2, with the stealth armor always being my favorite variant. Then there's the Ter-Shavar Ultra Warriors, the elite of the elite, followed by the Vral Kovar General, a single legendary model. And then to top it all off, the creme de la creme is Shas Vedame, the Arbiter. Each squad and model can be brought separately, however I would recommend the entire Strikeforce bundle as that nets you a solid discount over buying them separately. Now if you have eyes, the idea of these was basically, what if the Sangheili joined the Tau Empire, with each name actually having significance to both the Sangheili as well as the Tau, kinda like a mix of both naming conventions. Because of the Tau range's diversity, you could proxy them as anything or just have a great time painting and displaying. I've been super excited to launch these guys. They've been in the pipeline for ages. Link below to pick them up, or any of the other dozens and dozens of major minis is below. Today we'll go over each of the Tau Sphere expansions, detailing what the goal was, what was achieved, and any setbacks they faced. Let's get into it. The Tau have been expanding in a very linear way, as their faster than light travel is dog shit due to a lack of reliable ways to navigate the warp. Even with their advanced tech, they can only do short warp jumps as they don't have navigators or sorcerers or access to the webway, or just orc bullshit hacks. So unlike the Imperium, who just spread out in dozens of directions, warp jumping everywhere and conquering whatever they saw, the Tau have been expanding the bubble of their empire, hence the term sphere expansion. The Tau don't like having gaps in their empire that enemies can reside in, something the Imperium doesn't seem too bothered by. The first sphere expansion was when the Tau went from a single planet species to an intergalactic species. It put them on the map and entered them into the setting of 40k. However, as it was their first time leaving their homeworld, it was a hell of a process. This sphere expansion lasted about 1,000 years, as their faster than light travel was so shit that they were almost flying everywhere manually. This first expansion was called the Great Expansion and resulted in the Tau gaining 7 seps. Seps being star systems or even collections of star systems, so it came to a few dozen worlds, a massive increase from just one. They also began assimilating numerous Xeno races into the empire, gaining access to their technologies and advantages. Races like the Poktoon, who tragically died of a plague, as well as the Thraxians. No, not the hot big titty prey mantises from Invincible, more so a multi-armed bug-like race. The first sphere expansion was a raging success, even though it also put the Tau in direct contact with the Orcs. Now the Tau's policy was to integrate any sentient race they came across that could be integrated. The Orcs appeared powerful, possessed intelligence and culture. The Tau saw them as great candidates for assimilation and sent multiple water-caste diplomats carrying goods such as weapons, as they saw the Orc culture has been very weapon-based. The Tau diplomats even learnt Orc language and speech, which is basically just growing up in the asshole of England and getting drunk as fuck. The Orcs found the attempts at diplomacy hilarious and massacred the Tau diplomatic entourage, before then engaging in vicious wars against the Tau. Hence the Orcs were listed as incompatible with the greater good and marked for extermination. The first race to be added to that list, but definitely not the last. This sphere of expansion ended because the Tau Empire had grown so large that it took a Tau lifetime to go from one side to the other. It was getting impractical and the Tau were getting spread too thin. They would need to solve their slow faster than light travel issue if they wanted to expand any further in a safe manner. The first sphere did end up doing something pretty cool though, the Tau encountering the Kroot, who would become their most effective auxiliary force. The Kroot's homeworld was under siege by the Orcs, with the Tau's intervention saving the Kroot. This is why the Kroot are so loyal to the Tau, they literally saved their species. The Kroot vowed to never consume a Tau, despite the consumption of others being core to their culture, and they would fight alongside the Tau to their dying breath. The Kroot perfectly complemented the Tau. They were melee and short-range specialists, make for fantastic trackers, and have great instincts. Some of the most effective fighting forces in the galaxy galaxy is a combination of Kroot and Tau forces. The second sphere expansion was almost a century later, as the Tau had invented a new device for faster-than-light travel. It was called a ZFR Horizon Accelerator Engine and was created after the Tau discovered a derelict alien ship with a warp drive in it floating around. The Tau version was not a true warp drive, more like a warp skimmer. It allowed them to sort of skim on top of the warp, in a gap between real space and the immaterium, meaning their ships had no exposure to the warp. However, it did consume a shitload of power and was about 20% the speed of a true warp drive, but it was still a massive improvement and finally allowed for another sphere of expansion. This sphere expansion lasted nearly a century and was juicy as fuck. The conquest was led by Commander Puretide, the first legendary general in Tau history, who would go on to train Commander Farsight and Commander Shadowsun. It resulted in the Empire almost doubling in size, adding many new seps. Battlesuits were introduced into the Tau line for the very first time, whilst the Vespids also joined the Tau Empire. However, it wasn't all sunshine and rainbows. The Tau had a brief skirmish with what appeared to be the Necrons, they had their first run-in with the Tyranids, which wasn't very fun, and they also encountered the Imperium for the first time, leading to a massive war, the Damocles Gulf Crusade, which was so shocking and devastating to the Tau that it immediately ended the second sphere of expansion as the Tau began losing worlds and had to fully focus on defending their empire from Imperial onslaught. This war would shake the Tau Empire to their core, as they fought against Space Marines, Psykers, Imperial Titans, and more. Even the Imperium's space battle methodology was wild. Tau saw space battles as basically just shooting lasers from millions of kilometers away. However, the Imperium treats space battles like fucking pirate ship duels, as they board enemy ships, fire broadsides, and ram. Things the Tau thought were so unspeakably retarded that they never actually prepared for anyone to try that, so they got clapped pretty hard. The war ended when the Tau put up stiff resistance and the Tyranids started getting excited, so a ceasefire was called as the factions focused on wiping out the Tyranid threat instead. Either way, the second sphere expansion had ended. With the Tau now realizing the galaxy was a much larger, scarier place than they first believed, they were hesitant to launch another sphere expansion, instead focusing on consolidating and defending their territory whilst developing their weapons and technology. After about 3 centuries, their new supreme leader, Unvar, declared it was time for another sphere of expansion. The Tau had just defeated a large orc army that had been plaguing it for ages, and with Commander Shadowsun at the helm, they were ready. The Tau targeted Imperial space, since the Imperium controlled like fucking everything, driving deep into the Damocles Gulf and subjugating world after world. This area of Imperial space was kind of like a backwater part of the Imperium. It didn't get much love, hence many Imperial worlds were happy to join the Tau, who offered a better standard of living. The Tau were also extremely good at diplomacy. They allowed worshippers of the Emperor to continue with their faith, the greater good being more so a mindset and ideology that was actually compatible with religion. Kind of like how Buddhism isn't really a religion and you can be both Buddhist and another religion at the same time. I think, don't quote me on that. Shadowsun outplayed the Imperium time and time again, adding numerous new seps to the Empire. However, the longer the expansion went on, the more mad the Imperium got, until eventually Shadowsun began suffering losses, losing new seps and had to end the expansion, once again more so focusing on consolidation. Overall, it was a massive show of the strength by the Tau and put them on the map as a genuine threat. The 4th and Sphere expansions were kind of strange and didn't end super well. The Tau Empire could no longer easily linearly expand. They were surrounded by a Necron dynasty, the Imperium, and Tyranids were constantly circling, looking for weaknesses like a shark. The Great Rift had also just opened, creating more issues with travel and expansion. However, the Tau had also just invented their most powerful faster-than-light travel tech so far, the AL-38 Slipstream module, created after the Tau spent ages studying Imperial warp drive tech. Single ship tests showed the device to be safe and effective, so the Tau decided to send an entire fleet into a new region of space and almost create like a new Tau empire, not linearly connected to the current one. However, when an entire fleet fired their AL-38 Slipstream modules, the combined pressure on real space cooked it hard and dragged the entire 4th Sphere expansion fleet into the warp. Womp womp. Everyone assumed the entire fleet was lost. However, in truth, the Tau and the Warp are able to survive due to their weak souls not attracting the attention of warp predators. Eventually, they were returned to real space by a massive Tau-like warp entity, created from the collective belief of non-Tau auxiliaries within the Tau Empire, seeing the greater good as less of a concept and more so a god. The return of the 4th Sphere fleet also created a wormhole that manifested in the heart of the Tau Empire and linked it to where the fleet popped out of. This wormhole was called the Startide Nexus. The 4th Sphere fleet quickly colonized numerous worlds around them, and when the Tau Empire sent probes into the Startide Nexus, they were shocked to find the 4th Sphere fleet alive and well. Actually maybe not well. The experience in the warp had made the 4th Sphere Tau extremely racist, as they genocided all non-Tau within their fleet due to the outrage of the non-Tau perverting the greater good and turning it into a warp entity. Shadowsun immediately created the 5th Sphere expansion fleet and took it through the Startide Nexus to aid and reinforce what remained of the 4th Sphere expansion. They rapidly began conquering new worlds, adding new seps to the Empire. This was the first non-linear expansion, as these two halves of the Tau Empire were linked by the Startide Nexus portal. Now technically, the 4th sphere expansion ended as soon as it misfired and was sent into the warp, with the 5th sphere sort of doing both expansions. However, the Death Guard caught wind of the Startide Nexus and thought it'd be hilarious to invade it. The Death Guard were nearly unstoppable, slaughtering their way through both the 4th and 5th sphere forces led by Shadow Sun. It was only due to her tactical brilliance, the loss of a ton of Tau, and the literal Tau warp god itself getting involved that the Death Guard were beaten. However, the 5th sphere expansion was more or less over. So from what we can see, a sphere of expansion can last either 1,000 years or 5 seconds depending on the result. They had declared spheres of expansion before they've even begun. There is a 6th sphere of expansion currently being planned. However, the Tau don't yet know if they want to keep expanding the new territory on the other side of the Startide Nexus, or if they want to have another crack at Imperial space. Either way, I really hope it ends with them encountering Guilliman. That would be something to see. If you enjoyed the video and you want to support the channel, then pick up some Tau Healey elites, ideally the entire Strikeforce if you're feeling spicy. Hit the subscribe button, hit the real subscribe button for more Tau content. Join the Discord for more memes and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.